Milkor has signed a strategic deal with a South Korean company that will enhance its unmanned aerial vehicle, the Milkor 380. Now, the use of UAVs or drones has dominated the Russian-Ukraine war and currently the conflict in the Middle East. To unpack the significance of this deal, we welcome Daniel du Plessis. He's the Communications Director at Milkor. Daniel, thanks for being here. South Africa, in fact, has a pretty rich history in unmanned aerial vehicles. Tell us about this.
So South Africa has been using and developing unmanned aerial vehicles since the early 80s up until the early 2000s under the public entity now. Rich history indeed, offers a significant skill set and skilled individuals with a multitude of experience that was untapped for a large portion of the early 2000s until our company came along with a strategic vision to revive these capabilities, retain these critical skills, and enter into the drone industry.
What makes this deal with the South Korean company significant?
So the South Korean company Hanwha, the group company, essentially is listed among the top 20 defense companies globally. The defense sector spend and revenue is essentially above in excess of $6 billion annually. It's a reputable company globally, specifically in the sense that they have a multitude of maritime and surveillance radar capabilities. Now, for the unmanned aerial vehicle manufacturers like ourselves, having these capabilities as a sensor suite option enhances the overall efficiency and effectiveness of the operations the Milkor 380 was designed to produce.
Help me understand this. What's the difference between a drone and an unmanned aerial vehicle?
There's actually no difference. So right, the drone is a common term used for any unmanned aircraft. It can be a rotary wing, it can be a small DJI drone, but it's also referred to in a common terms in larger military operations. An unmanned aerial vehicle essentially refers to a larger vehicle that's essentially uncrewed, typically in excess of a light sports aircraft. So this UAV, for example, is 18.6 meters in wingspan, a maximum takeoff weight of 1,300 kilograms, and a payload capability of 220 kilograms.
Now, generally, are drones or UAVs the new wonder weapon of the modern battlefield?
So drones, in essence, has reshaped the way that modern conflicts and modern peacekeeping operations are conducted. We've seen it in international conflicts, but the versatility of them and the multi-role applications that they provide essentially is the main benefit. These include operations in surveillance reconnaissance for longer endurance. Typically, a manned aircraft only has the capability to perform these operations for 8 hours at a maximum, where our drone, for example, will fly continuously for 35 hours with advanced sensor capabilities. This also increases the opportunistic strike capabilities should you need to engage a target with an excess payload of 220 kilograms used specifically for these types of operations. So in a multitude of sensors, it can be used across a wide spectrum of operations, therefore reducing the overall operational expenses.
Can this particular industry boost economic growth in South Africa and create jobs?
That's a very good question, and I think the main point around that is that I have to categorically state, being involved in the defense industry directly, many South Africans and the general public might not be aware of this, but South Africa has world-leading technologies, predominantly not used by the SANDF due to budget constraints, so they might not be as familiar as they should. But many of these technologies are being exported globally, and the significance of a partnership with Hanwha, for example, a top 20 global defense company, and a South African company like Milkor, points exactly to that fact and speaks volume about the defense capabilities still residing within South Africa.
Is the country doing enough then to grow the sector, this defense sector?
I think defense and security in South Africa, in the general environment, especially if you look at the budget and the budget constraints that the SANDF and various other security clusters face, it is not a high priority at the moment for government, although I believe it should be. Essentially, if you have a stable defense and security cluster responsible for securing your sovereignty domestically and enhancing peacekeeping operations regionally, partnered with the SAPS and the BMA and their respective mandates, you have a stable country that can boost the economy going forward and be attractive for foreign investments as well.
When you look at the current South African Army, and I include here the South African Air Force, the SANDF, should UAVs become very much more a part of the planning for the future?
100%. I think with the recent withdrawal from the DRC, it essentially gives the SANDF, the members of parliament responsible for the Joint Standing Committee on Defence and the MODVA, or Ministry of Defence and Veteran Affairs, an opportunity to re-evaluate, assess, face the brutal facts of what is ongoing in the SANDF, and then present a feasible solution that can be carried out, with UAVs primarily playing a large role in that.
Can it be used for border control, and what about maritime patrols?
Both of those applications, especially the systems that we are planning to integrate from Hanwha, the South Korean company, predominantly used in a maritime environment, but also used along border surveillance capabilities. You have an aircraft that can fly 4,000 kilometers for 35 hours continuously over land or sea, essentially feeding information back to troops on the ground to respond accurately.
Daniel, does this mean that the job of a fighter pilot, a pilot who's flying a bomber aircraft, have their jobs become redundant?
Definitely not. And I think that's a general fear that we find when engaging with multiple different end users across the world, specifically in the Air Force regiments of these contingencies. There's a large fear among the peers in an Air Force that they want to fly an aircraft. And although an UAV is still operated by a licensed pilot, and there's a significant regiment of more than 12 months of training to operate this system effectively, the role of the UAV is predominantly to provide surveillance, reconnaissance, and intelligence in an air superiority environment, assisted with opportunistic strike capabilities. It does not remove the necessity for other advanced systems like fighter jets or bombers.
This must be a very expensive piece of equipment that we're talking about. But when you compare it to the cost of a fourth or a fifth generation fighter plane, which comes out cheaper?
So in both senses, both in the acquisition side of it, as well as the operational side of it, UAVs have shown a significant increase by reducing costs up to 5%. So a 20% cost compared to normal manned aircrafts in general, let alone from comparing them to fifth and fourth generation fighter jets. So huge cost savings in the benefits essentially allow you to perform your operations more effectively.
Daniel, thank you very much for your time as well as your insights. And that was Milkor's Communications Director, Daniel Du Plessis.